Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Weekend Waypoints. Joe Healy here for SEC Extra and D1 Baseball, getting you ready for the final regular season weekend of the season. Believe it or not, final regular season weekend of college baseball. Going to get you ready for everything happening this weekend, a Thursday to Saturday weekend, of course, as we wrap up the regular season. Get ready to go to Hoover. Quick turnaround this weekend. I am home this weekend rather than on the road at a game because of that quick turnaround ahead of a busy week. Before I get going with previewing this weekend's action and Thursday night's action, a reminder, SEC Tournament Preview live stream, Mark Etheridge and I, a special edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, if you will, Monday, May 20th. That is this coming Monday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Central. We're going to take a look at the SEC Tournament bracket, do some preview of the bracket with an emphasis on the Thursday elimination games, and we will also do some Q&A. So if you're going to be there with us live, bring some questions. Mark and I will do our best to answer them. And then if you do miss it live, you will be able to go back watch it on YouTube or Twitter or however you watched it. You'll be able to watch the recording just like you do with this show. So you don't need to do anything extra. However you watch this show, you'll be able to watch that show live. That'll be Monday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 Central, previewing the SEC tournament. Maybe some special guests along the way, but certainly Mark and I will be with you there. Okay, let's Jeremy Scott on Facebook says Roll Tide, and thanks for mentioning me earlier. Yeah, if you didn't watch our weekend preview podcast that myself, Mike Rooney, and Aaron Fitt did this morning, it was live as well, and Jeremy dropped in on that one as well. So I gave him a shout out for also being a regular on Weekend Waypoints. I certainly appreciate you, Jeremy. Okay, let's get to some news, as we always do to start off these episodes to begin the weekend. Not a ton this week, which is good, because a lot of times it's injury stuff, and we don't have as much new injury stuff anyway as we do, or at least as we have so often this season. A lot going on with that Arkansas Texas A&M series in terms of news. Both rotations a little bit different this time around. Brady Tigert, Mason Molina out of the Arkansas rotation, Gage Wood in behind Hagen Smith. Tigert is kind of a weird one because there was a thought that maybe there was an injury concern, but he's been given they've checked him out and everything has come back clean. But they are going to skip him in the rotation this weekend, perhaps out of just precaution, because if he's feeling something, he's feeling something. If that even is the case, right? It's been a little bit unclear exactly what the deal is there, but regardless, they're skipping Tigert this week. Molina as well. Molina just some backsliding. I think that's the biggest reason there. Wouldn't be shocked to see one or both of them in a prominent role. Honestly, wouldn't be shocked. There's a TBA out there. I wouldn't be shocked if Mason Molina ends up being that TBA guy, right? So something to watch for there. But Gage Wood back in the rotation. He's pitched really well out of the bullpen, obviously. Starting will be a different animal. We'll see what kind of leash he has. We'll see how long they want to go with him. I would guess that's going to be maybe an extended opener situation. Maybe not a true opener, 2 innings, but maybe 3-4. And then you go from there in the bullpen. We shall see. On the A&M side of it, Shane Sadeo started last weekend against Ole Miss, looked great. He is back in the rotation this weekend. So it's Ryan Prager with a TBA, and then Shane Sadeo, Ryan Prager, Shane Sadeo, TBA, excuse me. The question, the interesting thing there is not necessarily Sadeo being involved because he was last weekend, but more so that not only Tanner Jones, but also Justin Lampkin not in the projected rotation for Texas A&M. New episode of Highway to Hoover is out right now. I interviewed Travis L. Brown, who covers the Aggies for the Bryan College Station Eagle, and we talked a little bit about how even if they're backsliding a little bit, even if they're struggling, if A&M is going to get to Omaha and challenge to win a national title, they're going to need at least Lampkin and probably also Jones in a prominent role. The best version of that team is one that includes those guys in prominent roles. So look for A&M to circle back on those guys at some point. I don't think this is them being banished in any way there, but something to watch for there. And I think today, at least Thursday, the big question about this series is, will they be able to play tonight at all or late, or what is the deal? Weather not looking great in the Brazos Valley in College Station. A couple of data points here. Games at Houston, which is kind of like an hour and a half away from College Station, and games in Huntsville, at Sam Houston State, also postponed. Postponed in Houston, postponed in Huntsville, Texas. Huntsville's a little less than an hour away. So those are games in the region that have been postponed already. Obviously, there's a lot of motivation to get this game in, one of which is that it's on ESPN2. And anytime you've got a game that's on like one of the actual networks, ESPN, ESPN2, and to a lesser extent SEC Network, but certainly if you're on the big ESPN or ESPN2, there's a lot of motivation to get that game played in the scheduled window. So I think they're going to be a little bit stubborn about this one, in part for that reason, but also because, I mean, if you're Arkansas, you want a clean game for Hagen Smith. You want to be sure of it. So you don't want to put Hagen Smith out there and have him throw, 50 pitches in two and 2/3 innings or something, and then he has to be done for the day because of a rain delay. So they're going to have to be methodical about choosing the window from that standpoint. And A&M doesn't want to lose Prager to something like that any more than Arkansas, frankly, wants to lose Hagen Smith. So I think there's going to be a lot of motivation to really being intentional about this. Now, the weather looks pretty decent the rest of the weekend, so a Friday doubleheader is on the table, but not a lot of motivation to go with doubleheader necessarily the weekend before Hoover. That's kind of a tough time with the quick turnaround. Anyway, all that is to say, we'll see if the weather cooperates and what they'll do there, but certainly a wrinkle in that series. Speaking of wrinkles in the series, Ole Miss and LSU moved up to 5 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Central. That is in about 45 minutes from now. They are trying to get out of the way of some weather there as well. Scheduling-wise, Florida, there was a lot of intrigue about whether Florida would schedule a midweek game or two this past week to give themselves some buffer, because right now, as important as winning SEC games for Florida is staying above 500. For those who don't know, in order to be eligible for an at-large bid, you have to be above 500 overall. Ultimately, Kevin O'Sullivan decided not to add games, instead wanted to kind of just basically do everything they could and be loaded for bear to win the series this weekend in Athens. Mark Etheridge wrote about that on the site, so you can go check that out if you're interested. And I see both sides, right? Would it be nice to have a buffer to be above 500 by scheduling a game against, Florida A&M? Sure. But the flip side is also that, like, they don't just need to be above 500. They also need to have enough SEC wins. So if you win the series against Georgia, a lot of this takes care of itself. That would put you into the SEC tournament at 2 games over 500 if you win the series. And even if you lose on the opening day of the SEC tournament, you would still be above 500, right? So it is pretty cut and dry from that standpoint. So I do see the value in adding the game, but I don't think they needed to necessarily, so they did not. One more rotation thing, South Carolina pitching really struggled last weekend against Georgia. Now, that's true of a lot of pitching staffs that have faced the Georgia lineup, but it was tough for South Carolina last weekend. They're going Ty Good and then 2 TBAs after that. So everything is on the table. And I think all of the usual suspects will see time on the mound: Eli Jones and Roman Kimball and Dylan Eskew and of course, Garrett Gainey. And, all the usual suspects will pitch. I just think that's a signal from Mark Kingston and his staff of, like, it's all hands on deck. We're going to do everything we can to cobble together enough pitching to at least win a game in Knoxville. They're at Tennessee in Knoxville, in a situation where if you get swept again, they're already at 13 SEC wins. Their RPI is healthy. Let me look at it here. Yeah, their RPI is 19 as of right now. That would probably be enough in most years anyway to get you in, but it would put some pressure on. Hey, you probably don't want to lose that opening game in Hoover if you're coming in having lost your last 6 SEC games. So I say that to say, if you get a game at Tennessee, you get to 14 wins. The RPI obviously is still going to be in a really good place. You feel pretty good about it, but going in with 13 to Hoover would be they'd have to sweat a little bit. So getting a win here would take care of that. I think that's what they're signaling here, is like, we're willing to do whatever with our pitching to set us up for success. Okay, let's Liz on YouTube, I think, she's commenting on the A&M Arkansas, that weather is perhaps more of a concern in other places in the SEC on Friday and Saturday versus today, Thursday, a little bit of the inverse there. So yeah, just going to be, I mean, it's May in the Southeast. So whether I think going to be a central character through this weekend in Hoover, regionals, super regionals. It's just kind of that time of year. Last year, we got really fortunate with weather in Hoover. It was beautiful pretty much the entire week, not just in terms of clear skies, but also temperatures weren't bad. I suspect that we're due for either a really rainy or really hot. I will take the hot if it's not rainy. I would prefer that combination so the schedule doesn't get all gummed up. But we'll see. If we had control over the weather, I'm sure we would have all done something about it. If we could have all done something about it beforehand. Liz on YouTube mentioned South Carolina could also hope for a canceled game due to weather. Yeah, I mean, not having that extra loss could theoretically help a little, sure. For sure. That could. Not it doesn't help as much as a win, but not losing, yeah, that could also be a factor there. Okay, let's talk series of the weekend here. I think it depends on how you look at it. I've got a couple here. There's Arkansas A&M, obviously. This is a really highly anticipated series. It's been on everyone's radar since SEC play got underway, and it was clear these were going to be two of the best teams in the country. We thought for a while that it might be 1 versus 2. It is not that. But I would almost argue, and I wrote this in my weekend preview piece for the site, that there's almost more urgency in this series now than if it had been a series of 1 versus 2 and two teams that had kind of cruised through the regular season. The fact that A&M's lost back-to-back weekend series, the fact that Arkansas lost a series a couple weekends ago, and last weekend really had to fight hard to win a series at home against Mississippi State. These two teams are not necessarily playing their best baseball right now, both trying to get into postseason form, and having to do it against each other is tough because one team's going to come out of it, whether it's A&M losing a third straight series or Arkansas losing its second series in 3 weekends and having not played real clean baseball for a while. Both of those teams are going to be going into the postseason kind of searching for it, depending on who loses the series. So I think there is as much urgency in this series as there would have been had it been 1 versus 2. 1 versus 2 obviously would be maybe a better headline, but I do think it is a little more interesting with the way it's played out. A different kind of urgency, of course, is LSU Ole Miss. That's just a desperation series to get into position to be in a regional. The math is pretty simple here. The most likely scenario, of course, is LSU winning 2 of 3. If that happens, LSU and Ole Miss are both sitting on 12 SEC wins. Not enough, probably. Even with good RPIs, both teams have RPIs that are fine. As we sit here, Ole Miss sitting at 24, LSU at 35. Historically, 13 wins plus that kind of RPI gets you in, especially on the Ole Miss side of things. 35 is a little dicier, but I'd still be relatively confident if LSU can get to 13. Path more straightforward for Ole Miss. You win the series. You feel really good about it. You'd be sitting at 13. Your RPI would be probably about where it is now. LSU, if they sweep, that would put them in a pretty good position. But again, the most likely scenario seems like LSU winning 2 or 3 at home. They're both sitting on 12 going to Hoover, and you're in a position where you need to win at least that first game in Hoover and then probably get another one, because let's not forget that if you get through that single elimination round to start off the tournament, now you've moved on, and that's imperative, but also you've opened yourself up to taking on 2 more losses, right? So if you win that opening game and then lose your next 2, have you really helped yourself? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's no. We'll have to see, but my inclination is to say no. If you're truly a bowl team sitting on 12, you go into Hoover, you beat Hoover for your 13th win, but then you lose 2. That's tough. So big series, obviously, for those 2 teams. Big implications for the bubble. There's a lot of series that have implications for the bubble. Obviously, Georgia, Florida. We talked about Florida's predicament. Kentucky, Vanderbilt's in a situation where they need to go to Lexington and get at least a game. And that's tough. Lexington's been a tough, Tennessee had success in Lexington, but not a lot of other teams have. Arkansas went there and lost a series, for example. So not an easy thing for Vanderbilt to do. Their best path, of course, is getting a really good pitching performance from Holton, Cunningham, or both to win a series there. That is their path typically to winning big games. So we'll see how that ends up shaking out. Let's click over to a comment here. Justin Barker on YouTube, pretty straightforward question. Who wins SEC, outright or co-champs? I think given the situation, I would put money on Kentucky. They're a game up. I don't see either. Now, Tennessee, of course, they could sweep South Carolina and get there. They're at home. You could also have a situation where Arkansas sweeps A&M, and this is if Kentucky wins 2 of 3, which is what I'd bet on. But I wouldn't I wouldn't see Arkansas sweeping A&M, especially because on the road. So I think we can throw that out as a likely scenario. Anything's possible, of course. But then with Tennessee, I think South Carolina is desperate enough that there's a part of me that thinks that even though South Carolina has not looked great of late, I think they're going to get a game. So I think what we have is 2 of 3 for Kentucky. They get to 22 wins. What an impressive season for Kentucky. I keep kind of reminding myself how impressive it is. So I think they get to 22. I think Tennessee wins 2 of 3. They get to 21. And then Arkansas gets to, 20 or 21 as well. So I'm going Kentucky here, but a situation where Kentucky loses the series to a desperate Vanderbilt team and Tennessee wins 2 of 3 to be co-champs, tiebreaker to Tennessee, obviously, with the head-to-head. I could see that. Certainly, those seem like the 2 most likely scenarios. So I'll go number 1 for me is probably Kentucky winning it outright. Second most likely scenario is the Tennessee-Kentucky co-champs situation at the top of the standings. So those are kind of my, if you were to power rank, if you will, the scenarios. Jeremy on Facebook asks, is Alabama a lock for a regional? Boy, Alabama's tricky because I don't know that we've ever, and I'd have to ask Mark Etheridge, I don't know that there's really a lot of precedent for a team that's not a lock for regional having an RPI that good. Like their RPI is 11 sitting here. Like if they had 3 more wins, they'd be looking at, hey, if we win a game this weekend, we're hosting. Like that's how good the RPI is. And if they sweep this weekend, like could they get there? Like 15 regular season wins, then maybe you win a couple in Hoover and your RPI is top 10 or something. Like maybe, I wouldn't bet on it, but maybe, I don't know. Florida hosted at 15-15 a few years ago when they made a good run in Hoover. So there is a blueprint out there, but more likely we're talking about a regional bid and a probably a 2 seed for Alabama with that kind of RPI. So to answer your question more directly, Jeremy, I think they need to get a game this weekend. Now that you are playing Auburn, so you like your chances even against a rival to at least get that. You get 2 games. I think I think 1 game you got nothing to worry about because of that RPI. 2 games certainly, and then again you sweep it and like, hey, let's go to Hoover and see what they do because their RPI is going to be in a really good spot. They're going to be playing with a little bit of house money there, having gotten into a regional. So Alabama is probably one of the more interesting postseason cases I've seen in a long time because it doesn't make a ton of sense. I mean, it does because they've beaten a lot of good teams, but so rare is a situation where we've got an under 500 SEC team with an RPI of 11. That's just kind of crazy to me. So, get 1, Jeremy, and then I think you can rest easy. Get 2, and then you can get a little greedy and go for the sweep there and have a chance to just maybe play some home games in Tuscaloosa. We'll have to see. It'll depend on who the other candidates are. Cameron Vaughn on YouTube. My Rebels have a huge series versus LSU starting soon. Yep, about 33 minutes from now. Hashtag hottie toddy. We need to win the series if we want to get in. Yep, that's Cameron. You can go back on the recording. I just talked about them a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the path is straightforward for Ole Miss. I think if you say, hey, which is more likely, Ole Miss wins the series to get to 13 SEC wins and give themselves a shot, or LSU sweeps the series to get to 13 wins, I'm going to go Ole Miss. I'm still dubious of LSU having enough pitching to sweep anybody. Now, I would have had the same concern about Ole Miss, and maybe I still do, except for the fact that Ole Miss pitched great last weekend. And sure, A&M's hitters, some of them are kind of fighting it right now. Braden Montgomery, chief among them, but still, that's a really dangerous lineup that Ole Miss pitching, especially their starters last weekend, really navigated extremely well. So I just don't have a lot of confidence in LSU pitching enough to get the sweep. So I think it's more likely Ole Miss wins the series of those two options. Now, the most likely scenario, I think, in general, is Ole Miss getting 2 of 3. Both teams go to Hoover with 12 SEC wins, and they're both in a situation where they feel like we got to get a couple wins here in Hoover. The point I made, Cameron, who admits he just hopped on because he was mowing the grass. It is also that time of year, Cameron. I am spending a lot of my time these days mowing the grass, for better or worse. But the point I made earlier, Cameron, was that the tricky part about going to Hoover on 12 wins, let's say LSU wins 2 or 3, both teams have 12 wins, is that, yeah, you can win that opening game in Hoover, but once you win that opening game, you've now opened yourself up to losing 2 more games, because you're either going to win the tournament or you're going to lose 2 games, right? That's once you get past that opening round. And so Ole Miss wins the opener, great, but then what if you lose the next 2? Have you really helped yourself? I would say probably not. So, you know, getting a series win here, pulling that upset series win, just given that LSU's at home, I think is your cleanest path to feeling pretty good about it. But I think it's a huge series. I'm looking forward to watching. I think it's going to be really tense. I think there's going to be a lot of urgency, kind of verging on desperation sometimes. I think we'll see it in the pitcher usage. For LSU, I don't think they're going to be shy about putting Griffin Herring out there early and for a long time. Maybe trying to get a little extra out of Gage Jump and Luke Holman, pushing pitch counts, what have you. We'll see. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun regardless. I don't envy you, Cameron, because that's a stressful place to be as a fan. This kind of situation for both sides, frankly, so that I know that the series is fun, but there can also be a lot of anxiety. So I don't envy you in that regard, but it's going to be a lot of fun for someone like me who's neutral and covers it to just watch and see how it all plays out. Final comment here, Jeremy Scott on Facebook. Crazy things always seem to happen in Auburn when Alabama's there, regardless the sport. True. Yeah. I mean, we've learned that in football a time or two. That game in Jordan Hare is obviously a different deal than in Tuscaloosa. But yeah, so I fully expect Auburn to come to play, not just because of the rivalry series, but because give Auburn credit. They're not winning a lot of games, but they're still playing hard. Like they've not rolled over. Like they're still, I mean, they're still going out there and Butch has them playing like they still have a lot to play for. And that's not an easy thing to do. You see a lot of seasons that go like this that just completely spin out. And Auburn's still been competitive. Now, more often than not, it's not been enough. But they've still been competitive in a lot of games that you wouldn't, based on their record, think they'd be competitive in. So Alabama, as I'm sure Bama fans know, you can't just stroll into a series and think you can play C+ baseball and expect it to beat your rival. That's not really how it works. So Alabama's going to have to play well. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra at d1baseball.com. Thank you for joining me as always. Thank you for all the comments. That's my favorite part of this deal, is going back and forth with you all. And speaking of which, one more reminder, the SEC Tournament Preview live stream Monday, May 20th. That's this coming Monday, the night before the SEC Tournament. 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Central. Mark Etheridge and I will be there to preview the bracket with an emphasis on those elimination games on the first day. We'll also do a Q&A, so if you're coming to join us live, bring some questions. Mark and I would be happy to get through as many of those as we can in the time we have. Hoping to have some special guests along the way, but if nothing else, I can guarantee you Mark and I will be there to answer your questions, talk about the SEC Tournament. We're both excited to get there and get things started. All right, folks, enjoy the day of baseball. Hope the weather stays away mostly this weekend, but we shall see. I will talk to y'all tomorrow morning with Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints. Talk to y'all soon.